Hey everybody, it's Corey with Alpha Gamma Productions, here for another video game analysis. Now my first video I did was on The Last of Us, which I said was my favorite game, because it is. However, The Witcher 3 is probably my second favorite, and just barely. The Witcher 3, published by CD Projekt Red in Warsaw, Poland, was the first title in the series that I played when this was originally released back in 2015. I played the game going in pretty much blind on all story and history of the series, and by the conclusion of the game, I was incredibly invested in all of the characters, the world, the history, the music, the gameplay, the narrative, the atmosphere established by all that is good with this game. Not all that is good, actually, all that is great with this game. All I wanted was more Witcher 3, and I continued to explore all the areas I hadn't touched on during my first playthrough. I couldn't put down the subsequent DLCs, which were both incredible additions to the core title. Now I'm planning on something a little more ambitious with the Witcher 3 analysis. I'll be doing an entire video series on this title. I'm not sure how many episodes this will run, but I'm going to try and keep each episode between 20 to 30 minutes or so. As I move through each episode, I will try to discuss the story, the graphics, the gameplay, the characters, the music, and anything else I feel I can touch on. I want to make clear, however, that this will not be a walkthrough of the game. So I'll not be showing every mission and beast contract and hidden items, stuff like that, but rather just hit some major talking points for each section of the game. Let's jump right into episode 1. I want to call this particular episode The White Wolf in White Orchard. Now a little background on the story, which I will cover in more detail as I publish each video for this series. The game series is based on a series of books by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski. Geralt of Rivia is a witcher, which is a trained monster killer of sorts. Witchers became necessary when, during an event called the Conjunction of the Spheres, monsters were led into the mortal world. Witchers go through many trials and trainings, all sorts of weaponry training and survival skills, things like that. But the final test to be a Witcher is called the Trial of the Grasses. And this is actually where the Witchers will consume different mosses and grasses, things like that, and their vital signs are monitored by magic at that time because they lose a lot of control of their nervous system. They also ingest potions, things like that, and if they make it through the trials, they turn into a full-fledged monster killer. Or, if the trials don't go so well, they can die an extremely painful death. This trial also gives Witchers their signature cat-like eyes, incredible hearing, longer lives, lightning-quick speed, and ability to use signs. Now, signs are not full-fledged spells like a mage or sorceress would use, but smaller versions of various types of spells that a Witcher may employ in battle. You know, fire is a shield spell, all sorts of stuff like that. So, kind of a cool thing that, again, not quite the same power as a sorcerer's or a sorceress's type thing, but still. Witchers are generally taken from their families when young to begin their training. As such, Witchers have a reputation in the world for being kidnappers. Witchers are always armed with their 2 signature swords slung across their backs. One steel sword for dealing with dangerous beasts of the normal world, such as, bears, wolves, things like that, and a silver sword to deal with monsters not of the normal world. There are also many different schools of Witchers, including School of the Bear, School of the Griffin, of the Viper, of the Cat, and Geralt's school, the School of the Wolf. Hence one of his many nicknames, White Wolf. Geralt's hair turns stark white while undergoing the Trial of the Grasses, and so he kind of has that nickname, School of the Wolf, white hair, White Wolf. You get it. Now the entire game takes place on the continent, as well as the Skellige Isles. There's a large-scale war going on between the Nilfgaardian Empire and the Northern Realms. The realms that we will worry about for The Witcher 3 are Temeria and Redania. Temeria was most recently ruled by King Foltest, but Foltest was assassinated at the beginning of The Witcher 2. Spoiler if you hadn't played The Witcher 2. Foltest is assassinated in about the first hour of the game. This has left the country without a strong ruler, and thus Nilfgaard was able to take advantage. Redania, whose king Vizimir was also assassinated, is now ruled by Radovid V, or Radovid the Stern, or Radovid the Mad, depending on who you talk to. Some believe him to be mad, but again, depends on who you talk to. One of Radovid's main goals is to eradicate all sorceresses from his realms, as well as protect Redania from being taken over by the Nilfgaardian Empire. And we'll go a little further into this later, but one of Radovid's main goals is to try and press his influence in the large port city of Novigrad because of all the economic power and commerce that Novigrad has. He could use that to fund his armies, fund the war, etc. We'll get into that in a later episode, but just a little bit of foresight there. Now to the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt can best be described as an elite cavalry brigade from the world of Ainel. Ainel is another realm ruled by the Elder Folk, and the Wild Hunt ride like wraiths into other worlds to kidnap and bring back slaves for Ainel. And they bring with them the White Frost, which we'll get into more later. The Wild Hunt leaders, known as the Red Riders, are controlled by a king named Eredin, and they are currently after Cirilla. Is your head spinning yet? Lots of information if you're not familiar with The Witcher. Cirilla, Ciri for short, is an unofficial daughter of sorts to Geralt. Geralt trained her as a child to be a Witcher. She is not a full-fledged Witcher, but she has met much of the Witcher training, swordplay, things like that, at the castle of Kaer Morhen in the north. Kaer Morhen is where the School of the Wolf Witchers train, and they have trained there for many, many, many years, including Geralt himself. Ciri disappeared for a time, and rumor has it she is now returned. She is being sought by the Wild Hunt because she is a, quote, source, which I will explain in another video later, but again, just a little bit of foresight there. Where The Witcher 3 picks up, Temeria has already fallen in what is actually the third war with Nilfgaard. That's right, there were 2 wars before this. One of them ended in a treaty that lasted for a number of years, and then of course the treaty failed, and because it was just kind of an unfair treaty, I draw certain correlations to the Treaty of Versailles that was the treaty that ended World War I, but then of course World War II broke out because the treaty wasn't really a true solution to what was going on in Europe. So I kind of compare the first war with Nilfgaard, the treaty that ended it, to the second. And when the second war ended, the truce lasted for 16 days, and then the Empire of Nilfgaard made up some crazy story that they had been attacked in some way, and so justified basically being able to start up the war again. So this is the third war with the Nilfgaardian Empire, and the Nilfgaardian army is on the southern bank of the Pontar River, which serves as the border between Temeria and Redania. Redania has set up their main headquarters in the university city of Oxenford, home of Oxenford Academy, and King Radovid of Redania has hopes to take the port city and economic hub of Novigrad, as I mentioned, but again we will touch on that later. Now back to Geralt and his story. Geralt begins the game desperately seeking Yennefer of Vengerberg, an old love interest of the Witcher's as well as a sorceress. This takes Geralt and his mentor-teacher Vesemir to White Orchard, a small town near where one of the last battles for Temeria was recently fought. While going to White Orchard, they hear of a griffin that has been terrorizing the locals, as well as their Nilfgaardian occupiers. Geralt and Vesemir inquire at the local inn as to the whereabouts of Yennefer and if there is a contract on the griffin. Witchers make their money from monster contracts. A town or a city has a pest problem, so to speak, so they call in a witcher to serve as the exterminator. As such, Witchers do not work for free under almost any circumstances. While at the inn, Geralt talks to some of the townsfolk and learns of the game of Gwent, which I will cover in more detail later, but actually quite a fun card game to play within The Witcher 3. I got really addicted to this when I played through the game. And the card game actually has had so much success that CD Projekt Red has been working on a standalone Gwent title, which has been in beta testing for several months. They came out with some card decks, things like that. It was really popular with fans, and so they're taking advantage of that and really giving us something new to play, which hopefully should be fun when the finished product does release. Also, while at the inn, Geralt speaks with a man named Gaunter O'Dim, who names himself Master Mirror or the Man of Glass. Now, Gaunter O'Dim seems like a nobody, and I certainly didn't think he was anybody my first time playing through this game. Just a standard NPC that you would talk to in any RPG game. But that proves to be very far from the truth in The Witcher 3's first DLC pack, Hearts of Stone, which I will touch on once we finish with the regular title. O'Dim tells Geralt of the nearby Nilfgaardian garrison, who he says did see Yennefer as she rode in during the dead of night a few days prior. The garrison may also have a possible bounty on the head of the griffin, so that piques Geralt's interest on both accounts. Geralt leaves Vesemir at the inn and makes his way to the Nilfgaardian outpost and speaks with the captain of the Nilfgaardians and learns that they do indeed know the whereabouts of Yennefer. But of course, he wants Geralt to take care of the griffin before he will pass along the information. It's an RPG, that's just how some quests go. They do it in a really fun way though, so like I said, One of my favorite games of all time. But, you know, standard. Fetch, go take care of this and I'll give you the information. Geralt agrees and begins his investigation with a hunter who found many dead Nilfgaardian soldiers, apparently dismembered and mutilated by the griffin. Geralt also decides to use the plant buckthorn as bait to draw the griffin to a place of he and Vesemir's choosing. Upon further investigation, Geralt figures out the griffin is in fact a royal griffin, which is just kind of a little bit more of a badass version of a regular griffin. So Geralt makes preparations for taking on the griffin, including the brewing of hybrid oil to rub on his silver blade. Now, Witchers are, like I said, trained in combat, educated in the best ways to eradicate beasts and monsters of the other realms, and they receive a lot of training in potions and oils and bomb making as well. So, depending on which monster a Witcher would take on, they may be weak to a certain specific type of oil that Geralt may or may not know how to make. You find different recipes as you go through the game and different formulas and stuff like that. Let's stop here for a second before continuing with the kind of opening 3 or 4 hours of the game to talk about the graphics and the lighting and just how absolutely incredible in general this game looks. I mean, the original Witcher is now 10 years old. In fact, CD Projekt Red just celebrated that particular anniversary. And for its time in 2007, The Witcher looked great. It's widely considered to be one of the best RPGs ever made. Obviously, this was improved upon with the release of The Witcher 2, but The Witcher 3 is just a new standard. I know there are prettier looking games. In fact, in my last video that I did on The Last of Us, I actually said I think the best looking game on console is in fact Uncharted 4, but The Witcher 3 still looks fantastic even 2.5 years from the original release. The texture work is all very well done, and the draw distance for how much detail is packed into every shot is incredible. The lighting with the sun and the moon is so well done, and the shadows they cast in their respective parts of the day. The weather system was something CD Projekt Red was extremely proud of, and it's easy to see why. The trees and grass all move gracefully with the changing winds and weather patterns, and fog or smoke rolls lazily through towns and over fields in perfect harmony with the surrounding environment. The ground is dotted with many different types of shrubbery, and the light passes through tree branches in just a beautiful way that creates a fantastic ambiance, especially during things like sunsets, stuff like that. The architecture and general look of the NPCs and other characters really conveys the dirtiness of the world and the terrible state Temeria is currently in and how desperate the local populace is for a sense of normalcy of any kind, even if that normalcy is being occupied by Nilfgaardian troops. Geralt himself looks as good as ever as well. He's gone through many iterations throughout the 3 titles, and his facial features really convey his experiences. To another point, a lot of the items just randomly dropped into this world are fantastic, because they aren't really just random. Everything CD Projekt Red put into this title is there for some sort of reason, even if you don't realize that reason until later. You may walk up to a bandit camp, but instead of just killing bandits and grabbing their loot and moving on, you may find directions to a treasure haul, or you may find mysterious orders from the bandit's leader that may lead you on a completely different side quest line. You may also help or offer aid to someone and not find out until hours later in the game whether you actually made a difference or not. Let's talk about the music for this particular area of the game. Different areas of the game change up the orchestral score slightly, but wow is all I have to say. I am a huge fan of video game soundtracks. I'm a firm believer in how much they help games just as they do in film. The Witcher 3 sits up there with some of my favorite game soundtracks of all time, the likes of The Last of Us, BioShock, and Alan Wake. The composer, Marcin Cybulowicz, did an incredible job along with the Brandenburg State Orchestra. The score was recorded in Frankfurt, Germany, and the folk band Percival was also brought in to lend their own style. Many medieval times instruments were used, such as the lute, the hurdy-gurdy, and the Renaissance fiddle. Just the tone it relays in the title is incredible. The score really emphasizes the extreme cruelty of the current world and again the desperation of the peasantry. At times, though, the music also conveys some hope. Also, the high-pitched chant singing during the combat and cutscenes was so well done. Speaking of cutscenes, yet another item CD Projekt Red hit out of the park. The voice acting done by all is just fantastic, including the voice actor for Geralt, Doug Kokel. He has been the voice of Geralt for the English edition of the Witcher games since the first title. Solid job all the way around by William Roberts as well, who is the voice of Vesemir. The solid voice acting actually includes the NPCs. Even small exchanges with a merchant or a blacksmith is engaging because they are believable characters in this world, and from the way they speak, you believe they have a history behind their eyes and care about the world around them just as much as Geralt does. I will get more into some of the other important voice actors in later episodes as we move more through the main story. The combat has also progressed immensely since the first Witcher title. In the first Witcher, it was kind of a timed mouse click with different styles of combat speed based on the type of enemy you were fighting. You had a kind of slow, more powerful speed and a quicker, less powerful speed, and you also had a separate stance for fighting in groups. Signs were also present, but the swordplay was pretty straightforward. The Witcher 2 expanded upon this combat and made it much more fluid with a targeting system and so on, but The Witcher 3 I think does a great job with this as well. If I had to pick a weak point with The Witcher 3, it might very well be the combat, but I still enjoy the swordplay very much. And all I really mean by that is that sometimes the fluid motion between enemies doesn't work exactly how it should, and also sometimes the sound effects when you are hitting an enemy doesn't necessarily always match up with your sword stroke, but really other than that, the combat was just fine for me. So the fact it was my least favorite part isn't saying much. Making use of signs is extremely helpful with the swordplay as well. During my playthrough, I found Yrden and Igni to be the most helpful. Yrden conjures a circle around Geralt that slows down enemies. It can also reduce their defense and also harm them in certain cases. It also allows Geralt to attack specters who otherwise would be non-solid ghosts. Igni is the fire sign, which is a great attack plan for man or beast throughout the game. Obviously other people may play different than I did, and some of the other signs really have their uses as well, and I can touch on some of those later on. One last item I want to touch on this episode before finishing with Geralt's impending battle with the Griffin is Witcher contracts. Like I said earlier, Witchers make their coin by finding and completing monster-killing contracts. CD Projekt Red really did a fantastic job with these. Each contract has a great backstory, a cool beast to take on, and good rewards for doing so. Sometimes the side story gives you choices you wouldn't think of as well. Sometimes there are ways to finish contracts without actually killing that particular monster. You may be able to help that monster in some way or solve the problem in a different way other than pulling out your sword. Sometimes your decisions and thinking outside the box work to great effect. I want to touch on the first Witcher contract you can acquire in the game. In White Orchard, Geralt undertakes a contract to defeat a ghost of some kind that is haunting a well that a nearby village relies on for water. Geralt agrees to the contract after some price haggling. Now, price haggling is just kind of a fun little mini game that you can do with all of your contracts, as well as some other interactions with NPCs where you can kind of haggle over the price they're going to pay you. And if you ask them to pay too much, they'll get a little annoyed and say, hey, you got to lower your price. And then eventually you can find kind of a happy point where they're agreeing to pay you. Don't ever take whatever the first offer is for the contracts. You can always get just a little bit more. To really investigate the area around this well where the ghost resides, Geralt makes use of his Witcher senses, which is sort of a detective mode type ability or a senses mode type ability, like if you ever played the Batman Arkham games or the Hitman games. Witcher senses allow Geralt to smell scents others can't, see bloodstains that have been gone for weeks, see tracks others would miss, and hear far-off sounds. Geralt examines the well area and determines he believes the ghost is actually a Noonwraith. Geralt, being a Witcher, knows the best strategy to get rid of a Noonwraith is to find the body the Wraith used to inhabit while living, as well as any other physical item that may still bind them to the world. This particular specter isn't too difficult by any means, because it's early in the game, but it's a cool fight nonetheless. Geralt finds the woman's body as well as a bracelet she wore while living, and burns both together. A fight ensues where Geralt vanquishes the Noonwraith, and the specter can now die because of his work. As the game progresses, these contracts get a little more elaborate, and you as a player face larger and more difficult creatures. I'll touch on a few of these in later episodes. Okay, finally back to Geralt and the fight with the Griffin, which he has undertaken not only to be paid, but also to be told the whereabouts of Yennefer. When Geralt rejoins Vesemir, Vesemir has prepared a fake sheep to look enticing to the Griffin from the air. Geralt brings him the buckthorn plant to draw the Griffin in. Also at this time, Vesemir gives Geralt a crossbow to help in the battle with the Griffin. Now this fight isn't too crazy as long as you've done a few side quests to help level up Geralt. Maybe you did the Witcher contract that I just showed a second ago, or maybe you've done some other side quests just helping some random NPCs throughout this starting area of the game. The key with this fight is to hit the Griffin with the crossbow, and then once he falls to the ground, go in with Igni and your silver blade. Your silver blade coated in hybrid oil, which we brewed earlier. Careful to dodge some of the Griffin's attacks with wings and their beak when they come down to the ground. They do kind of like a sweep move. As long as you kind of dodge around the back and keep hitting with your silver sword and Igni, this fight really shouldn't be super difficult for you. In the end, Geralt and Vesemir succeed, and Geralt removes the Griffin's head as a trophy, which he can take back to the Nilfgaardian garrison as proof of his kill. Geralt does indeed take the head back and is told the location of Yennefer. She is currently at the Palace of Vizima, which is the capital city of Temeria. Geralt prepares to depart from the White Orchard Inn with Vesemir in tow when, lo and behold, Yennefer herself turns up with a Nilfgaardian escort to reveal that she is working with the Nilfgaardian Empire. Yennefer informs Geralt that the Emperor wishes to see him and speak with him about a proposition. Geralt agrees, and as the convoy leaves town, Vesemir decides he's going to head back to Kaer Morhen instead of to Vizima, and so Yennefer and Geralt head off to Vizima on their own with the Nilfgaardian escort. A distance outside of town, the convoy is suddenly set upon by the Wild Hunt, who is presumably pursuing Yennefer. Geralt and Yennefer are the only two to escape, and they make it to the royal palace in Vizima. I'm going to leave episode 1 here. We will pick up with Geralt in Vizima in the next episode. We will also head to a new area of the game known as Velen and meet some important characters for the progression of the story, as well as grab a lot more Witcher contracts, meet a lot more NPCs, discover a lot more of the world. This is when the game kind of takes off the restrictor plate or the training wheels and really lets you explore everything that it has to offer. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'm sorry that my voice changes tonality a bit during the video. I worked on this analysis for a few weeks kind of on and off, and during that time I came down with a cold, but hopefully everything sounds okay. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe subscribe. I will have the second episode for The Witcher 3 out in a few weeks. Until then, keep on experiencing everything great about video games.
Let's go!